We're fortunate today to have the opportunity to hear from Ambassador Mark Johnson, who is the founder of the World Affairs Council. Ambassador Johnson has traveled the world and returned home. He's a Great Falls native, returned home to Montana just a few years ago to share his experiences with us. He is a 30-year veteran of the State Department and has served in a variety of foreign policy positions, notably the U.S. Ambassador to Senegal and Deputy Chief of Mission at the American Embassy in Cairo. He's also worked in the Office of Iranian Affairs and during the Iran Hostages Working Group earlier in his career. He was the Vice Chairman for the World Affairs Councils of America and currently serves as the Vice Chair for the U.S. Center for Citizen Diplomacy. He's a busy man, and we're lucky to have him here with us today. He recently returned from a trip to Iran this past fall and is actually headed to Egypt next week. In 2000, Ambassador Johnson founded the World Affairs Council to connect Montanans and classrooms and communities with the world around us. He's an extraordinary individual whom I've had the pleasure of working with over the last 8 years, and we're very fortunate to have him with us today. I would encourage you all to ask questions. While he truly exemplifies the meaning of public service, Ambassador Johnson travels around the country speaking to groups, but most of his time is spent here traveling to schools and communities around the state of Montana. He's a role model to many, myself included, and he's here with us today to shed some light on the turbulence in the Middle East and why it matters to us here in Montana. It is my honor to introduce Ambassador Mark Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aubrey. That was a wonderful introduction. Am I coming through okay in the back? You can hear? Good. I once gave a speech I thought was flawless and magnificent. It was in French, only to find out the power had been cut. Nobody heard a word I said. So thank you all for coming. It is a great pleasure to have you here. I think when you walk into the room where the competition will be held, you're going to be quite amazed. And as you look at all those tables, we have 54 teams this year. When we started, imagine just 3 tables. That's where we were. So it's a tribute to Aubrey, it's a tribute to the council, and above all, it's a tribute to you, the students, and your teachers and faculty and administrators, and your parents. So again, thank you all for coming. Now, Montanans know what it's like to get from point A to point B. You got to drive, it's a long ways, the distance. I was telling somebody in the East Coast, you know, some of our schools come over 300 miles away. I said, that's like driving from D.C. through New York and up in Connecticut and almost into Massachusetts. They were astonished. I said, yeah, we do that. That's Montana. That's how you have to connect with each other. Let me thank first and foremost my colleague, Dr. Udo Fluke, for his magnificent presentation. It was a very chilling portrayal of what life was like. But I think he would agree. The bottom line in this is that people can make a difference. The power of people, and you're going to see it, or I'm going to tell you about it when we turn to the Middle East. One other point: those of you, some of you that are thinking about what happens next after high school, I urge you to consider this fine institution, the University of Montana, and you can avail yourselves of the rich pool of talent that we have here with professors like Dr. Fluke. So again, thank you for coming. We're very honored that you would make your time available to us. I did grow up in Great Falls. I'm a Great Falls Central guy, the old Great Falls Central. And as we like to say in Great Falls, what happens in Great Falls, right, stays in Great Falls. Okay, thank you. I was one of those Montana kids that couldn't wait to get out of the state. I wanted to get away, and I did. I went back east, I went to college, I joined the Foreign Service, the diplomatic service, and I had a wonderful career. In fact, the places where I served ought to be a category in Worldquest. I served in Indonesia, I served in Africa, I served in what was then Upper Volta, today Burkina Faso. What's the capital of Burkina Faso? We should put that on the test, huh? Somebody said it. Ouagadougou, okay. and elsewhere in the continent of Africa, which was very special to me. I also served, as Aubrey has just told you, in the Middle East. I was in Iran during the revolution. I was in Egypt during the peace process, as we called it then, optimistically, between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I was in Kuwait a couple of times, and I was thinking as I was driving here that it was 20 years ago, almost to the day, that I was getting off a Black Hawk helicopter in Kuwait at the conclusion of Desert Storm. And it was an unforgettable day. That the chopper came down, kicked up a lot of dust, the doors opened. I had behind me on board a bunch of these special forces, these Delta guys that are real tough, you know, and we were a little concerned about what Saddam Hussein had left behind, landmines, what have you. They said, "Don't worry, sir, we'll be right behind you." So there I was. And, excuse me, I survived. 30 years ago, not quite to the day, the U.S. hostages came home from Iran, and that was quite a memorable moment. I participated in those negotiations. I've been back to both of those countries. I will share some observations with you. I came to my senses, retired, came back to Montana. I started the World Affairs Council. For obvious reasons, I wanted to give something back to the community. But I also wanted to demolish what I call two myths. The first myth is that, you know, the world doesn't matter. I live in Cascade County. Who cares what happens, all right? I think 9/11 put an end to that myth pretty well. But the second myth that's out there is, okay, there's nothing I can do about it. Maybe important. You say it's important. I think I agree, but I don't know that there's anything I can do. Well, you've seen an example of what young people did in East Germany, and I'll tell you some other examples. Frankly, I think the greatest challenge facing the United States is this: having globalized the world with McDonald's restaurants and Lady Gaga videos. I used to say Madonna, but she's now out of touch. She's passé, so I had to get updated. Having globalized the rest of the world, we have failed to globalize ourselves. A significant percentage of people in the United States cannot find Afghanistan on a map. It's true. A couple of years ago, the Intel Corporation, this famous high-tech company, held its annual science competition. Maybe some of you have participated in it. Very impressive. 60,000 U.S. students took part in that. Very impressive. Pat ourselves on the back. How many Chinese took it? 5 million. You see my point. We have to get engaged with the world, and that's why I started the World Affairs Council. Now, we have behind us a map of the Middle East, which I want to turn to and say a few words about that. One other thing that I took away from Kuwait, as we landed the next couple of days, we went out and surveyed the battlefield, which was quite gruesome. We also went into some of the torture chambers that Saddam Hussein had set up. And the experience I took from both of those was, it doesn't have to be this way. Or never again. Well, guess what? Seemingly we haven't learned very much. Now, if it is to change, it's going to be your generation that does that. And especially in the Middle East. Here we have behind us a fairly broad sweep of the region. I'll break it down into two parts. We have the Arab part, the Arab world as it's called, 22 nations, roughly the same size as the United States in terms of geography, and roughly the same size in terms of population, ranging from, you can read for yourselves. But to that, we have to add two other countries that are very significant. One is Israel. Israel is an entirely different country, and the other is Iran. Iran's a little hard to make out because of the color there. There's Iran. Iran is Muslim, Shia, but it is not Arab. It has an entirely different historical, cultural, linguistic narrative. And in fact, you saw a slide that used the word Hungary. Much of There are derivatives of Hungarian language in Persian or vice versa, just to show you that it's a much different situation. Those 22 countries of the Arab League plus the others. Now, one of the questions that I get, and it's a very legitimate question, especially today, so what? Why do we care about the Middle East? Again, I'll pick on myself. Why should we care here in Cascade County? Let me give you a couple of examples. One, look at the strategic location here. And this is very pertinent in terms of what's going on in Libya. There's the Mediterranean, right? There's the Indian Ocean. There is the Red Sea. There are the Straits. There are the Persian Gulf, and not shown, but there is the Suez Canal. At the center of all of this is the Middle East. You want to go north-south, you want to go east-west. This is a critical region, all right, in terms of the strategy. Secondly, the U.S. has significant military operations all up and down this region. We have 2 bases in Kuwait. Anybody that's served in Iraq has gone to Kuwait to muster up into and then out of Iraq. We have in this country here, Bahrain, a large naval facility, and we have one of the largest air forces in the world here is in Qatar, in Doha, all right, and some other bases. So we have a significant military protection that is increasingly important to the well-being of our international interests. We have a lot of trade with that region, $70 billion. Our total trade exports with China is about $90 billion. But let me make it real. If I ask you the question, which country in the world buys the most wheat? Who is the leading buyer of wheat? Again, we grow wheat and barley, in Great Falls, around Great Falls. The largest buyer is Egypt. Did you know that? The health and prosperity of Egypt in terms of their economy means they need to buy more wheat, and that wheat will help our own local economy. Did I mention oil? Huh? 60% is generally in this region, centered largely in Saudi Arabia. About 30% of the daily production comes out of this region. The first figure is in terms of the total capacity. That becomes a big deal if supplies, because of Libya and elsewhere, are cut off. The only way you can make up the deficit, the difference, is in this region right here. And frankly, that ain't going to change. I wished it would. Maybe you guys can do something about it. I call it oil dialysis. Here is the Persian Gulf, right where the red is. Those are the Straits of Hormuz. And notice who controls them largely, the Iranians on the other side. Through those straits pass 17 million barrels of oil a day. Okay, that's a number. What does that mean? That's 3 times more than the entire production of the U.S. in terms of petroleum. It's not hard to block that. And I just told you that Iran sits in a strategic position. So oil and petroleum and vital energy resources. If you are a Muslim, a Christian, or a Jew, in some way and on some levels, the Holy Land is important to you, right? Right around there, in some way and in some levels. And finally, the reason why it matters at the heart of the Middle East, strip away everything I've just said, are the people. And the people are magnificent, wonderful. Just some of the most lovely, charming people that I've ever met. And this is the heart and soul, I think, of the Middle East. Now, let's turn our attention to Egypt. As Aubrey said, I was there in November. I'll tell you a little story. In November, we were at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, the largest embassy in the world. We were at the embassy there, and we asked the senior official, "What keeps you up at night?" He said, "What keeps me up at night is the future of Hosni Mubarak, the president." That was November. 4 weeks ago, to this day, I thought Egypt was on the verge of committing national suicide. The ruler, the pharaoh, Mubarak, adamantly and defiantly refused to step down. And protests which had been building, intensified. A lot of bloodshed started to emerge, and it looked like all hell would break loose. Somewhere on the night or the morning of the 10th of February, the 11th of February, the Egyptian military went to Mubarak, and they quoted, I don't know this for a fact, but it's a reasonable expectation based on my knowledge of Egypt. And they said to him, there's an old Arab expression, 2 people, 1 grave, and it ain't going to be us. And with that and the pressure that they had and the power of the people, they engineered a soft coup that brought Mubarak out of power and has put us on the course in Egypt that we're witnessing today. In the days leading up to that event, the people of Egypt discovered their power, and the Pharaoh discovered his weakness. And I think it is one of the most significant political events in today's Middle East. Since that time, you've been watching the whole process of revolts, rebellion, turbulence, demonstrations, protests unfold throughout the region, right? With Egypt, you have 11 countries that are in some stage of turbulence. Now, I just have to tell you, this is, to me, unbelievable. I could have never, ever imagined something like this happening in today's Middle East, but it has. I think the most important countries to watch as this drama plays out. Egypt. Egypt's the heart and soul of the Arab world. Every modern political development in the Arab world has started in Egypt. How it goes in Egypt will determine how it plays out in the rest. Another country that is very significant, Yemen. Why Yemen? Yemen is ground zero today for al-Qaeda terrorism. All right, do you remember the fellow a couple years ago, the Christmas Eve bomber? That was initiated out of Yemen. You remember the toner cartridges that had bombs in them? That was initiated out of Yemen. Fort Hood, the shooting, that was initiated out of Yemen. All right, I won't belabor it. Now, the last country that I think is significant, will surprise you. You can't even see it, but I'll point it out to you. There it is. Bahrain. What an odd thing to say. It's a tiny microscopic country. Why would I mention that? Look where Bahrain is. There's Saudi Arabia, and there's Iran. What's in between? This little island. 70% of Bahrainis are Shia Muslims. This is the dominant Shia presence, so there is an attraction. Saudi Arabia represents the Sunni version of Islam. All right? If Bahrain is eager to play a destabilizing force, and it is, it will seek to do whatever it can, whatever mischief it can spread in Bahrain. That has an impact on Saudi Arabia. It has an impact on the Arab side of the Gulf. And oh, by the way, did I mention we have a very large naval facility in Bahrain? I am not saying that this is imminent, but if you are a strategic planner, you might want to think about this. All right. Now, the countries that are surprisingly quiet, and it's worth noting, Palestine, both Gaza and the West Bank are relatively quiet. Syria, of course, Syria is understandable. Syria is a police state that's in perpetual lockdown, so you don't get by with any kind of a. And for the moment, this is the big issue, Saudi Arabia, because of the oil and its location. Saudi Arabia is relatively quiet. I do foresee some issues, some protest, but to see something like Egypt and the like I don't think is in the cards. I don't think it's going to happen. I could be proven wrong, but that's my feeling right now. What about Libya? Libya is really in the news, isn't it? Libya is an insane asylum with a voice named Muammar Gaddafi. Now, I don't mean to minimize the plight of the people that are protesting and trying to fight for their freedom. I don't at all. I understand their suffering. Their bravery is really unbelievable. But Libya will not have the impact that, say, an Egypt will. That's my only point there. So I don't think that is as significant as Egypt and the other countries would be. Now, how in the world did this happen? It's very interesting. I will focus my remarks on Egypt, but I think there will be some impact there. You could easily translate that into the events of other countries. Now, every Egyptian has in his or her DNA a hunger for stability. They are hardwired for stability. The Egyptians say, we like progress without change. And they say, you know, you Americans, you like change without progress. And I think they have a point. Hardwired, and here's an example when we talk about, is Egypt timeless or is it out of time? This will be familiar to you. Just take a moment. I think the point I want to symbolize is this eternal process of never unchanging Egypt. Here is the Sphinx, and behind it is the second of the Great Pyramids. Really quite remarkable structures, absolutely fabulous. The wall has been recently excavated, and we were one of the first to see that. The Sphinx, the Arabs call it Abu Hul, the father of terror. A little historical footnote here. Notice the Sphinx's nose. It's missing. Part of it's missing. And the mythology is that Napoleon shot it off. You know, you always blame the French, right? Well, it's a myth. It didn't happen. The perpetrator of that was the Arab conqueror of Egypt in the 7th century, who came and found any kind of image that had a human-like face to be sacrilegious, and so he attempted to demolish it. That's the timeless aspect of Egypt that has endured. Would you believe that that was built 4,500 years ago? It's absolutely astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. By the way, the pyramid, which contains maybe 2.5 million blocks, it's laid out along the cardinal points, north, south, east, west, and they are exactly aligned. The entire structure, 4,500 years ago, is level to about 1/8 of an inch. How did they do that? We don't know. But they did it. That's what's important. That's the timeless. But there's a new narrative in Egypt and elsewhere in the region that I just sketched out for you. The idea of change. Now we're in downtown Cairo, Tahrir Square. I hope you had a chance to see some of the footage during the turbulence. I thought CNN did a good job, showed a lot of bravery with their reporters. This is early on in the demonstration. And a large number of these people are basically young, 29 and younger, all right? What drove them to this square? First, I think the frustration of not being able to find a job. If you're not connected or if you don't pay a bribe, your parents don't have a lot of money, your chances of getting employment, no matter how hard you've worked at the university, are pretty scant. Secondly, they have no way to express themselves politically. I mean, it's not a great mystery. People that you see here are clamoring for the things that we take for granted: hope, opportunity, and above all, dignity. And I think that was one of the main characteristics of this demonstration in Tahrir Square. By the way, this building is the most feared and hated building in Egypt. This is the Ministry of Interior, the Mogama. Bad things happen in those places. That's where the state security operates, they were the ones that early on began to crack down and beat heads and even kill people. So, and the U.S. Embassy is, you can't see it, but it's over here. So it's not far from there, although the embassy was never really a touch. So they protest for a better life economically, protest for a better life politically, and on top of that was what I would call a suffocating layer of repression and corruption. I mean, people aren't stupid. They know their leaders are stupid. They know their leaders are ripping them off. And this was an added dimension. So people got angry and they got connected. You heard about the social media. And they began to come out and protest in the central square. Now, when I say autocratic governments, the average age of the 11 countries that I've summarized, the average age, let me start over. Average length of time that these rulers have been in power is 21 years. Mubarak had been in power since 1981. In Yemen, Saleh, the leader, had been in power for 32 years. So you get a sense. Now, it's always important when you look at something, obviously you notice what is happening, but let me tell you what did not happen, and this will illustrate this new narrative and why I think it's so important. What did not happen was you did not hear Islamic chants. This was not about religion, okay? This was not about religion. It was remarkably free. We may get to that point, but what drove these people out was not some theocratic or religious belief. You did not see the Israeli flag burned, and you did not see the U.S. flag burned. I think that is very significant. Heretofore, what the ruler would have done is to encourage the people out there to burn the Israeli or the U.S. flag. These were kind of the licensed grievance and deflected attention away from the regime itself. Well, these people were smarter than that, and they were after a sense of dignity. When we saw this in the face of a young man in his 30s named Wael Ghunaim, a very, very impressive, charismatic man who had been in the protests somewhere in this, he's probably in that midst right now. He was picked up, he was detained, he was beaten, and then he was released. He went on national television in Cairo. And as he was being interviewed and asked about his experiences, he broke down. He started sobbing. And he turned to the camera and he said, "It's not our fault. It's not our fault. We are Egyptians." And with that, you get a sense of this dignity and pride and this new nationalism that, frankly, I thought had been lost for decades. And it appears to be back in force. Now, what happens next? What we hope for, the outcome that we all, I think, all would like to see is that Egypt moves on a path toward a civil society and democracy. The problem here is that Egypt does not have a tradition of strong, independent political parties. They've basically been crushed over the years. It has a couple of people that are in the news, and I'll mention them briefly. One is Mohammed el-Baradei, the former head of the UN's Atomic Energy Agency. He's a very good man. I don't think that he has the standing within Egypt. In other words, I don't think he is seen as the equivalent, the Egyptian equivalent of Nelson Mandela. My guess is the next president will be a man named Amr Moussa, M-O-U-S-S-A, the former foreign minister and secretary general of the Arab League. I think he will be a strong contender. And Egypt is preparing for something they've never done. Again, we take this completely for granted. It's called a free election. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Well, what's the big deal? They've never done it. And so you have a woman in the streets, a little older than you folks, saying, "We love democracy, but we don't know how to do it." That's the issue. The danger is that one pharaoh will be replaced by another, meaning that the army will come in, step in, and take over and crack down, fearing that things might get out of control. So far, so good. The Constitution is moving in the right direction. They have dates for elections. A presidential election will happen this summer. So I take that as a good sign. The other scenario, the other possibility is that there will be an Islamist takeover, and the name that's on everybody's lips is the Muslim Brotherhood, right? You've heard about them, you've studied about them. Muslim Brotherhood has deep roots in Egyptian society. It goes back to the 1920s. It was formed against the colonial repression, and then as an effort to give spiritual meaning, if you will, to the lives of Muslims. And yes, it did evolve into violence and terror, although the Brotherhood has broken with that since about the 1960s. And they are not part of Al-Qaeda, Islamic Jihad, and some of the very, very vicious, violent Islamist organizations. They will certainly make gains. They will certainly make gains. I do not think they will dominate the political process. There's no leader within the Brotherhood that is capable of hijacking it. The army will watch this very carefully. The other religious establishment, the conservative religious establishment in Egypt, will watch it, not members of the Brotherhood. The people in this square will watch it very carefully and will have something to say about it. And the Brotherhood itself is fragmented generationally and ideologically, so there will be some barriers there to them seizing complete power. So a lot of fear and hysteria, frankly, about an Islamist takeover in Egypt. The Egyptians are very secular. I don't see that this. I don't think that this will happen. But let me add this: I was involved in the Iranian Revolution. All right, we went through the same process, roughly, kind of, sort of. And at the end of the day, the Islamist forces did seize power, and they shoved aside the secular Democrats, and they manipulated the political landscape. And what we have is today's Iran. That, I won't kid myself, as Sean Penn once said, I was born at night, but I wasn't born yesterday. So I will watch this very, very carefully. But that's the outcome that I would foresee happening. Now, again, what happens in Egypt will have an enormous impact on the rest of the region. Now, let's talk about Iran, the other country. In many ways, the situation there is worse, and yet it is more significant, and it's something that we need to be aware of. We need to pay attention. We need to understand it better, and I will try and give you a few thoughts about that. I first went to Iran in 1979. I was in Tehran. We were attempting to monitor the revolution, which had unfolded in January, February. I was there in the late summer. We weren't making much progress. I left, went back to Washington, continued watching it from the State Department, say early August. And then on November 4th, 1979, the hostages were seized. Now, in 2009 and 2010, I went back to Iran. A little bit of trepidation, I have to say. But it was very interesting what I found. Two observations. The first thing I saw after 30 years, I'd literally not stepped foot in Iran for 30 years, kind of an interesting experiment. Number one is that Iran of 2009 was a lot less religious, believe it or not. They call themselves the Islamic Republic. And when the revolution unfolded in 1979, I consider it the most dramatic political effect in the development in the Middle East. There were two components to the revolution. The first was an internal one. It was the marriage of a state with a religion, the Islamic Republic. All right? We'd never seen anything like that. No one in the Middle East had seen anything like it. A supreme leader, an ayatollah, a religious figure, has complete power, and that continues to this very day. But what's important for us to note is that that revolution had an external component. Iran saw itself as the leading force for radical Islam. They were to be the vanguard of fighting for justice and the oppressed, using their version of Shia radical Islam. And that's a force that's very much present with us today. Now, let me mention that somewhat paradoxically, giving you these two impressions, and from what you've seen yourself, the people of Iran are incredibly friendly. Incredibly friendly. Let's just show you. I just have one little picture of this. These are you haven't seen any Iranians in person, these are Iranian women standing here. And they're very attractive, very personable. This woman was part of our delegation. She was from Colorado. I think she got a little tired at this point. She sat down. These women were in a famous mosque, and they were concerned. They came over and chatted with her, wanted to practice their English. Very touching. And later, they took her and her husband to a little tea shop down an alley, and this couple had the experience of a lifetime. Most opinion polls will tell you that the most friendly and pro-American country in the Middle East, are you ready for this? Iran. Iran. And here you have a manifestation of that. And the Iranians say, we're a lot like you, and vice versa. And so they, as their turbulence unfolded, they were very anxious to know how we would react and what we would say. In 2009, Dr. Fluke alluded to this, Iran held an election. Many, many people your age and above hoped for a complete change, a more quote-unquote democratic government. It did not happen. They took to the streets, they protested, and unlike Egypt, where the army went in and said to the pharaoh, buddy, you got to get out of here. The army went in and broke their skulls. Raw, vicious violence. And that is the Iran that we have, that we're dealing with today, this really harsh, repressive regime. And I always say about Iran, even though the people are wonderful, I say about today's Iran, it will get worse before it gets worse. But these aspirations that we've seen elsewhere cannot be denied even in Iran. We will see change, but it will take longer than we think. By the way, the women are all wearing the hijab, right? Although notice how they have arrayed their scarves, very beautiful hair, and they want it to peek out. They're wearing jeans and pants, showing a little bit of a figure. This is rather daring in Iran. The hijab is not customary, although very traditional people do wear it. It's the law of Iran. It is called enforcing Islamic purity. But you just see you can just tell from their faces how charming they were and how very interested they were in us. And I want to make one other point. In the revolution, in the Green Movement, the protests against the regime of Ahmadinejad, in those protests, a leading force are women like this. Women will hold the key to the future outcome, political outcome of Iran. And the same is true in Egypt, though in Egypt the women are not quite as visible. They're not as much in the front. But these women, I don't know about these women particularly, especially, but in general are on the front lines. They are showing incredible courage and bravery. Now, why does it matter? A couple of points here. First of all, the world should condemn Iran for its deplorable human rights record. You know, in the month of January, the Iranian regime hanged 66 people trying to stifle any kind of message, any kind of dissent. They have put the two political leaders are currently under house arrest, and they, like Syria, are engaged in a process of lockdown, and they are winning. They're in control. It will be very difficult to change this. Second issue that you're aware of is Iran building a bomb? Is it going for a nuclear weapon? Iran has had a long-standing program to develop nuclear energy, which, you may find shocking for me to say this, I think is rather sensible to alleviate their dependency on oil, precious oil and natural gas. And if it stopped there, that would be fine. But it goes beyond into suspicious activities leading to enrichment that can be used in weapons. And oh, by the way, if they say they're not building a bomb, why are they testing long-range missiles? Why are they working on a nuclear nose cone which you would fit over the weapon to be delivered? In other words, they're just not credible. My own view is that Iran will move very, very, very close to the actual development of a bomb. In other words, they want us in the West to think they have a bomb. Whether they do or not, I don't think so. I have a lot of problem with the concept of Iran actually using a nuclear weapon. This is a nation that considers itself to be the heir to one of the world's greatest civilizations, the Persian Empire. Now, you call me naive, and maybe I am, but I do think that's a barrier. But they will use it for psychological reasons. The most important reason to pay attention to Iran is their support for terrorist groups. And let me go back to the map and give you a sense of what I mean by that. Iran, seeking to export its version of radical Islam, has established what I would say beachheads in the region where its influence can be felt. Let's say, for example, you want to bring peace about between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Who doesn't? Absolutely. You're going to have to deal with Iran, believe it or not, because they've established a beachhead in Gaza with a group called Hamas. It's really quite remarkable. The lovely country of Lebanon and its neighbor Syria, if you hope for some kind of a positive outcome, guess what? Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, the Party of God, controls political developments in that country. We've been fighting a war in this country called Iraq for many years. The only country that wanted to be rid of Saddam Hussein more than the U.S. was Iran. Iran has now manipulated itself where they are the dominant outside influence in that area. Even here in Iran, that little dogleg there has a Shia population, and it is said that Iran is manipulating a protest group there. I've mentioned Bahrain. By the way, today a shipment of Iranian weapons were intercepted in western Afghanistan. Iran has an interest there. In other words, the way I would put it is that the Iranian regime sees an historic opportunity to spread its influence. And that's why all of this matters so much in terms of being aware and being engaged. One last point about why I mentioned to you earlier why all of this matters. I can just summarize it very quickly. A few years ago, a scholar named Huntington wrote a book called The Clash of Civilizations. Maybe you've read it, heard of it, Clash of Civilizations. I didn't completely agree with it at the time, but I have my own clash of civilizations. And that clash features the Persians versus the Arabs. Persians versus the Arabs. Or I'll put it more precisely, the Shia of Iran versus the Sunnis of Saudi Arabia. For control, for power, for wealth, it is a very significant clash that's unfolding. One of the prizes is right here, Egypt. And that's why I say, to repeat, how Egypt goes will have a dramatic bearing on what I call this clash of civilizations. And yes, I do exaggerate, I do overstate, I do overdramatize, but you have to lay these things out. If you can't solve a problem until you've started to define it. I strongly urge you to consider careers in international affairs. Take advantage of the opportunities here at this university. Get engaged, stay engaged. I've had 4 or 5 students join the Foreign Service who are now serving abroad as diplomats. To put it rather bluntly, the Middle East will be to your generation as Vietnam was to mine. So get engaged, and don't think somebody else is going to do it. It's going to have to be up to your generation. And I know you're quite capable and competent of that, and I thank you once again for participating in Academic Worldquest. I'll stop here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Right there. Yes? That's a good comment. Let me just say that what you see, this young man was set upon by an official of the government who happened to be a woman, very officious and smarmy. You know, and she either pulled his stand down. This guy couldn't find a job. He couldn't find a job. He wasn't connected. His family didn't have influence. He had a college degree. He was selling fruit on the corner, trying to make ends meet. And she came by and kicked his stand over. My point is that in today's Middle East, people do not dream about democracy. They die for it. You raised, that's a very important point. The question was, recently Iran moved 2 warships through the Suez Canal, and is there any chance of war between Israel and Iran? The answer to that is no, although the Iranians would like the Israelis to think that they will, but they won't. That's all psychological. As this demonstration was unfolding, again, all hell was breaking out in Egypt and in the region. The Iranians sensed an opportunity. They had never sailed into the Suez Canal for 30 years, 31 years, never. At this particular time and this particular moment, they wanted the whole world to know they were in the neighborhood. And so for the first time since the 1979 revolution, 78 probably, you had Iranian warships sailing off the coast of Israel. What a message, what a signal. That was Exhibit A. Exhibit B was activities, manipulation in Bahrain. Again, Iran sees a historic opportunity to expand its influence into the region. That's right. And what Iran does in response to his question, and I said, pretty glibly, no, I don't think Iran and Israel will go to war. Iran doesn't have to. They've got a proxy. It's called Hezbollah. And in 2006, Hezbollah fought the Israelis to a standstill. The Israelis don't like to admit this, but they did. They did. And Iran stands poised as a force, what do you call it, a proxy force. In other words, like they're a puppeteer and they're pulling the strings on Hezbollah. The danger, and the Iranians have signaled to Israel, don't mess around with us. You want to bomb our nuclear reactors? Yeah, try it. Are you feeling lucky? They have stockpiled 40,000 rockets in Hezbollah arsenals. And they will fire those on Israeli cities. Now, do you know what that's like? A rocket has just been fired. You have 15 seconds. Now, Israelis have bomb shelters. They have very good civil defense. You have 5 kids, your big Israeli settler family. Now you've got 12 seconds. The missile is coming. You can hear it. Huh? You've got 4 of your kids. Where's the 5th? Now you have 2 seconds. Imagine the psychological terror that creates. And that's how Iran spreads its fear and intimidation in the world. So that was a very good question. Yeah, Hezbollah, the party of God, formed by the Iranians in the early 80s. By the way, it was Hezbollah that blew up the U.S. Embassy in 1983. It was Hezbollah that blew up the Marine Corps barracks in 1983. Let's go over to this side here, and then I'll come back. Yeah. Well, I forgot, I haven't looked at wheat prices, but they were about over $7, right? I mean, they are very high. There's a question of demand. There's a question, I think, more of how can I describe, more of economic factors. There have been crops that have failed. Australia's had some bad weather. I think Russian, the Siberian production is off. The only country that seems to be doing well is the United States in terms of production. So there's a supply and demand effect, but there's also a psychological effect. If people think there's a shortage, given all that they see on the news, then they will bid that price up. So there's some speculation. But the price of food is very, very critical. In some ways more critical than the price of oil. The Kurds are a sad case. The Kurds are a tragic case. The Kurds live, bear with me, I'll get the map out so I can point it out to you. There we are. You could say the Kurds are the largest group of people dispossessed without their own homeland. All right, they are found in Iraq. They are found here in northern Iran. You find some a little bit in Syria, and you find some on the border of Turkey. None of those states that I just mentioned wants to take the Kurds in because it changes the internal political dynamics. The Kurds have in the past organized, especially for the Turks, some very vicious terrorist gangs that have tried to spread evil. And so and actually done some killings. So nobody is going to give the Kurds any slack. We saw that in Iran. However, the issue between the Kurds here and the Sunni Arabs here, and I'm referring to Iraq, has got to be resolved. If for no other reason than those two people, one here, in between are the major oil fields in northern Iraq. So they have to solve that. But it's I would say the greatest tragedy nobody has heard of, the Kurds. So if you ever have a chance to study, it'd be well worth your while to see what's going on there. Let's go. Go ahead and shout out. I can't. Yes, that would be great. Ethiopia is a very key country, very significant country. I was once director of East African Affairs at the U.S. State Department. In the 1960s and early 70s, we loved Ethiopia. We really did. Haile Selassie, remember him? Rastafarians worshipped him. True. And we hated Somalia. We really did, because they were a client of the Soviet Union. This is how the world works. Sorry to break it to you. Ethiopia underwent a revolution and became a Marxist state. Now we hate Ethiopia. We loved them yesterday. We hate them today. Oh, by the way, Siad Barre came to power, and he gave us military bases. Now we love Somalia. All right. So that's a peculiarity. We have the patience of a grasshopper, and we never have any kind of sustained. None of this here is a light switch that you can nimbly turn on and off. One point that I want to make about Ethiopia and Egypt, and it has not been stated, and I'm astonished that it hasn't. What flows from here to here to here to here? You got it. Thank you. The Nile. Where does 85% of the Nile come from? Ethiopia. So what happens in Ethiopia will cause great shivers, to put it mildly, in Egypt. Put differently, I don't think Egypt would ever go to war with its regional neighbors, except under one condition. Somebody messing with the Nile. That's war. They will attack. That's how serious it is. And Ethiopia, for better or for worse, Ethiopia is trying to engage in Somalia with the sort of mixed results. So they're a country also to keep watching. Yes. FBI agent. What is the status of diplomatic relations between U.S. and Iran? Very simple. Zero. None. We don't have any. We broke those in April of 1980. I can tell you a story, but I'll do it later. We don't have any relations. And as you remember, I just want to make a point. In the 2008 presidential campaign, one of those rare moments when a foreign policy issue came up, the question was, should we be dealing with Iran? Right? And one candidate said, yeah, I would talk to them unconditionally. The other said, that's naive, and I'll let you figure out who said what. We have never stopped talking to the Iranians, even though we don't have diplomatic relations. The Iranians were helpful, or to put it differently, were not unhelpful in Afghanistan. All right? There were a few moments in Iran where they were helpful. And the Bush administration, little known fact, in June of 2008, actually attempted to create a diplomatic presence, not recognition, but a presence in Tehran. The problem when dealing with the Iranians on any official level is that for this Iranian regime, anti-Americanism is the oxygen with which they breathe. Anybody that shows favoritism toward the United States is immediately condemned. These three hikers that were seized in July of 2009 for crossing the border, maybe they were naive, they should have known better, maybe they shouldn't have been trying to be so quote-unquote adventuresome. Here's how today's Iran, the president says, well, they're in the hands of our justice system. They will be dealt with according to the legal process of Iran. They were seized in July of 2009. They did not see a lawyer until September 10. All right? They've been used as a hostage. Now, there's some thought maybe there'll be a renewed effort. Robert Levinson, the FBI agent, this is a truly bizarre case, has disappeared, literally disappeared. Now Secretary of State Clinton said, we have information that he's alive and well somewhere in Southwest Asia. There's a lot more to this story than we know. The Iranians are making some positive noises. You know, it's almost sickening that these poor people will be used as negotiating chips in this process. The Iranians will want something in return. And, you know, to get a loved one back, you would pay that price. On this, I do. Yeah. You probably didn't hear the question. There's been some comments about establishing a no-fly zone over Libya as a way of, you know, supporting in somehow, some manner the rebels, the anti-Gaddafi forces. Number one, we ran a no-fly zone in Iraq for 12 years, trying to influence Saddam Hussein, trying to force him out. How'd that turn out for us? Didn't work at all. Didn't work. When you say no-fly zone, comma, you must add a declaration of war. This is war. So I think it is a bad idea. I've used stronger language in the past, but you seem like nice people. I'll just say it's a bad idea. Now, well, isn't that rather harsh of you to say that? I acknowledge and feel the pain and suffering of the people in the streets of Libya. This, however, is not the way to go to do it. What Gaddafi would then say is to his so-called loyal masses, there they are. The foreigners are coming in, and we Libyans must stand together. In other words, he could manipulate that for his own purpose. Number two, I have to believe in what the wisdom of our Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, says, is that it's very unworkable. I mean, this is almost the size of Europe in some ways. It's a big, big area, all right? So I don't think it's a good idea. I would put the same amount of effort into getting humanitarian aid into the country. We have a CIA. They have clandestine operations. I would put them on the ground. That's how I would go first. Maybe at some point we'll get into that, but as soon as in a no-fly zone a helicopter is damaged, a U.S. aircraft is damaged, it's a whole different world. And oh, by the way, did I mention we have some stuff going on in Iraq and Afghanistan? We don't really, do we need it now? Not for this case, not for the insane asylum with a voice. So how are we doing? Two more? Aubrey said two more. What side of the room? I'm on this side. Yes, sir. Nice. What would be the best moves for the United States in the Middle East today? First of all, adopt a sense of patience. Be in it for the long run. It's not a light switch, and don't pretend otherwise. Number two, can we please identify our values? And whatever those values are, can we not support them in places like Iran? How is our revolution based? Anybody? What was it based on? What were the revolutionary forces trying to gain in? I heard the word freedom. Are we opposed to freedom? We sure sound like it. I mean, we don't sound like it. You know, doing nothing. You may take this as a criticism. I could make this even-handed for the last 3 or 4 administrations. But I have to tell you, in the Middle East, doing nothing becomes a policy decision. Well, we're going to play it safe. We're going to wait and see. And the bad guys take a message from that. So number one, I would move to build the elements of civic society, the League of Women Voters. I would put a lot of money into quote-unquote democracy building efforts. Not as we define it, that can be the kiss of death. But these people, the people that are in the streets, they know what they want, and we ought to be able to help them. Number two, I would help them jumpstart their economies. So these people that are 28, 29, go to a good school in Egypt and elsewhere can get a job, have some hope, have dignity, have opportunity and freedom. Number three, I think it's three, we ain't going anywhere until we break this addiction to oil, right? We've got to do something about that, because that colors, that contaminates, if you will, and I know I've been part of this. I understand where we're coming from. Gas prices probably changed by the time you drove over here. But we've got to do something about that and make sense of our presence there. I'm a realist. I understand that's not going to happen, but we've got to take some steps. And we have to protect our friends and allies when they are threatened, and I'm now referring to Iran. And above all, please, 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 let's try and bring some peace to Palestine and Israel, because that is the most corrosive thing in today's Middle East. General David Petraeus, the commander of forces in Afghanistan, has said repeatedly, my troops are put in harm's way because the enemy draws support from the Palestine-Israel crisis. How will tribes and tribal loyalties, this is a very key question, very powerful question. It will have a major effect in Libya. Libya is but a tribal society. Egypt has a more secular established society. It will have a bearing, it has had a bearing in places like Iraq. So tribal elements are very, very powerful, and this map only gives you a slice of Afghanistan where they're even more important. And that makes it a very complicated, because everything I said about building jobs, creating states, in this region where the enemy of my enemy is my friend, magnifies the difficulty of reaching what we would consider to be an acceptable outcome. Now, I'll be around, so please, I'd like to continue the discussion, but I think we need to break now so that we can get set up for the next event. How many of you, by the way, this is the last question, how many of you, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, there's not a trick question, but how many of you have friends, neighbors, relatives, or you know of someone personally who has served in Iraq or Afghanistan? Oh my God. So you can't say it, can you? The Middle East doesn't matter. That's my point. Thank you again for coming over. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and hear these wonderful questions.